start recording. Thank you, Lene.
You've just taken 2 minutes of my time.
Yeah.
That's on purpose.
You deserve it. You deserve it.
Absolutely.
That was absolutely on purpose, Martin. Go forward.
I wasn't going to pay attention to the 6 minutes anyway, so it doesn't make a difference.
I will remember you. Don't worry.
And I don't recognize myself in that bio, so I don't think it's really true. But thanks for this opportunity. I'm coming from a place of setting the context for the concept of how migrants are to be received in many countries around the world. I see this as a way to actually increase the capacity of communities to build and to be more open to diversity and to others. Migration, from my place and looking at context, migration will continue to take place, period. And I will talk about the numbers in a few minutes. But the context is really, how do we bring communities to be proactive, to prepare to receive cultural communities, individuals, but also to respect the people that they're bringing in or they're actually absorbing in a peaceful and calm and energetic process, and demonstrating that their voices and they do matter to the future of the communities that they're coming. I don't believe it's true for most people who are moving around the world that that's what they face. By and large, it's very unusual. I come from a place of looking at building communities and working with people who've actually been migrating, whether they've come as immigrants or have had the refugee experience. And their experiences have taught me a lot about what I can expect when we actually talk about this context. So just to be really clear, and I'm not sure everybody knows this, and this data comes from the Migration Data Portal from the International Organization of Migration, whom I used to work with, and I didn't know they had a data portal, but 280 million people are in movement around the world now. Okay, 280 million people. 48% are female. 14% are young people between the ages of 19 and 1. 12.2% are seniors and older, from 65 and older. Some of that's shocking to me about the fact that the majority are females. The context of migration is based on a number of themes without getting into the details. Environment has a really strong bearing on that. Family migration is incredibly strong. However, there's forced migration and displacement, and we see more of that taking place. We also have labor migration. We have child and youth migration. We have older persons migration. And we also have people who return to where they started. That's all the context of movement around the world. What I find interesting is when you think about it, more and more of us will be facing environmental risks. We'll be facing different ways of viewing if we're going to be accepted from one country to another, and that forces us to think about moving. Primarily, the concern is also about urbanization and how that's changing the dynamics of movement around the world. So how do we accept and how do we actually understand a way of being able to accept, respond to people who are coming into our environments in a way that is both respectful, but also valuing what they bring to us. Bildung and the model of looking at the wisdom that people bring from other countries, from other cultures, from other contexts is very important to the way we see building community. The folks who are receiving have a responsibility, have a moral obligation to actually not just simply receive, but also to integrate and to also value the intelligence, the capacity, and also, to a large extent, the assets that the communities bring. Our conversation today is opening up the idea that how, as receiving nations, do we accept the responsibility as both a moral imperative, but also a responsibility as a human being to absorb people who need our assistance and who bring a tremendous opportunity for us to grow together in a safe and socially responsible environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Very overwhelming numbers and the challenge for all of us, the ones that are moving, the ones that are receiving, and this dynamic between people. Thank you. And by now, and you respecting the 6 minutes, you are
Not bad, eh?
always
I have one,
on
but I
time.
have one additional thing to say.
Please, I'm
Always.
not surprised, always.
If we had the time,
Yes.
it would be a very important thing to think about receiving nations in terms of how do they provide psychological safety for individuals. We talk about that from an organizational perspective, but we never talk about it from a community perspective.
Community perspective.
So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yes, that's a wonderful crossroad, as you said. How do we build psychological safety into communities and bring this alive? And how Bildung can be a supporter of this, or a process that supports us on bringing this alive. Thank you, Martin. And now let's listen to Alka. Thank you, Alka, for accepting our invitation. Alka, PhD educator and a academic. I love this. Or a researcher, practitioner, a lifelong learning that taught in English and literacy studies in India before moving to Canada. So again, someone that is cross-cultural and moving around the world. In Canada, specialized in migration and labor markets, pursuing doctoral work in interdisciplinary peace and conflict studies. Alka uses, and we are going to see this, of course, storytelling strategies and tools from the field of career development and practice to support individuals through their career transitions journeys in Canada. She positions herself as committed into the work with individuals and organizations with focus on using research insights to help strengthen diversity and inclusion practices and help practical solutions to labor market challenges and unjust hiring practices. Whoa, Alka, I'm really, really curious to listen to your view, to your insights, the seeds that you are bringing to us about such an important theme, and migration, integration, and Bildung. Now it's your turn. Please, most welcome.
Thank you, Ines. Thanks, Lene. It's a great opportunity and an honor to be part of this. And ever since I came to know about Bildung, I'm quite fascinated and trying to figure out how the frame and how the lens can be integrated into my own work. So good to be here. I don't know whether I should be saying good morning because it's like 3:30 a.m. for me. In Toronto, Canada.
Good dawn, maybe. Good dawn.
Yeah, it's just a couple of hours before daybreak here. So based on the Indigenous tradition here in Canada and in the true spirit of reconciliation, every event and every talk kind of often begins with a land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of the respect in that way, I just want to start by introducing myself and saying that I am an immigrant on these lands, and I'm a settler, and I just want to situate myself a little bit in a couple of sentences before I start saying what I'd like to say. I'm really grateful, first of all, for being invited here to participate. I feel like I live in several in-between spaces all at once. For instance, geographically speaking, I feel a sense of belonging both in India and where I'm from, and in Canada where I now live. In terms of a disciplinary home, I live somewhere in between literary studies and the interdisciplinary social sciences, perhaps then between narrative, numbers, and stories. Working in the migration sector in the last 10 years, both as a researcher and a practitioner, I often self-identify as I said, as a academic. I really believe in using the robustness of research insights, but really take them outside the academic space to do something with them outside in the everyday world. Context, I believe, is always a crucial factor. And when we think about migratory movements, even more so. And multiculturalism and immigrant integration practices can look very different based on our vantage point in the world, and also what the historical and economic, political, and environmental contexts are at a certain time. They begin to look different. The particular context of my brief talk is Canadian multiculturalism. And in order to illuminate some of the contradictions embedded in this phenomenon, I will provide a few examples that focus on its uniqueness. Let me begin with just like a backgrounder on Canadian multiculturalism. So implemented as official policy in Canada exactly half a century ago, multiculturalism in Canada was intentioned to protect the rights and freedoms of ethnic communities and to encourage the preservation of their differences, their heritage, their cultures and religious beliefs, and their languages. All this while celebrating their diversity. As a pathway to facilitate immigrant integration, Canadian multiculturalism did not follow the US melting pot model, but rather offered a template of differentiated identity as signified by a mosaic or a colorful fruit salad. Does it mean then that there is no racism or discrimination here in Canada, and that racial justice and equal access to opportunities exist for racialized newcomers? Not really. As the pandemic has demonstrated, without a doubt, it is racialized groups, newcomers and women, the elderly, and those with disabilities that have been most severely impacted by COVID-19. When compared with many other immigrant receiving countries in the world, like Australia and New Zealand, the United States, Europe, and England, where multiculturalism signifies diversity, in Canada, the rights and freedoms of immigrant communities are actually enshrined in the Canadian Constitution. Certainly, access to legal process is helpful when members of minority groups experience oppression or wrongdoing, but unless it comes with the power to enforce, it doesn't add up to so much. Does the policy of multiculturalism that believes so strongly in cultural pluralism translate everyday reality into a just and inclusive society? Are Canadian workplaces free of discrimination and microaggressions, and are they really welcoming? Of course not. Also, to be honest, state-led initiatives cannot go very far in everyday practice. Neither can they transform mindsets or legislate social behaviors. They often create the opposite effect through highlighting difference. They then fuel racial tensions, create enclaves, and a competitive environment, leading to backlash from dominant groups that don't really agree with policy initiatives that provide religious accommodations to minorities, for instance. Many also believe that immigrants and newcomers are stealing their jobs. Particularly in the case of highly skilled, racialized economic immigrants, which is where part of my work is located, selected specifically for their human capital, the official policy of multiculturalism does not even have the ability to remove the systemic bottlenecks that exist in their economic integration pathways. Their ethnic names, the color of their skin, and their international accents become central to the narrative of refusal. And these specific markers predispose these individuals to a range of discriminatory hiring policies and practices, assumptions and behaviors from a range of stakeholders. So accreditation agencies and licensing bodies, employers and HR professionals repeatedly shut the door on them, indicating through such careless and arrogant gestures that the international qualifications and work experience highly skilled immigrants bring with them are not good enough for Canada. So where does Bildung Way fit into all this? I was struck by Bildung for the following reasons. One, its potential to access interdisciplinary and intersectional frames of knowledge so that the playing field may be leveled. Two, its ability to democratize access to knowledge creation, leading to practices and systems based in co-creation, collaboration, and growth. Three, Bildung, I think, can help us envision and actualize a way to bridge the gap between theory and practice, and through doing this, create conditions for social change and transformation. Finally, just in conclusion, I want to say, if we were to look through a Bildung lens to examine and address gaps and vulnerabilities in immigrant welcome and integration globally, we might be able to figure out how the elite classes can see themselves as more interconnected with those with less power through empathy, and by doing that, privilege could be distributed more evenly to build more egalitarian societal structures. Thank you.
Thank you. Bringing back parts of what Martin brought us about the numbers, about the conditions of receiving and moving all around the world, and also Alka, what you brought us about the microaggressions, the differences, how much we are really wanting to receive people and prepared for to share and to receive also different inner worlds and promote equality and an integration of possibilities. So now questions to Alka and Martin. Alia, I'm not sure if I pronounced your name correctly. Most welcome to our group. Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Hello. Would you like to present yourself or where you are calling us from for us to know a little bit better?
Yeah, okay. I would like to, I'm Hala, I'm from Ukraine, and I'm volunteering for Bildung in Ukraine as an entrepreneur. And I'm interested in this topic and in this related field, I mean, about adult education. And I think it's like a second chance for adults to get this education and for society too. And it's like, from my opinion, it's like second chance for society in this life. Nor next, I'm just here and now, and it's cool, I think.
Thank you. And we really need second chances by now. Because we
Yeah,
really
right.
need. Thank you. Thank you. Armand, for Alia to know a little bit of you, can you present yourself very shortly also? And Lene, I believe 1 minute also. Tiny,
Lena,
tiny.
I know,
You know,
because
everybody knows Lene, hands in the air.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
So we are good on that. Armand, just for Alia to be more near you, could you present yourself very shortly for us to bring the discussion?
My name is Armand, and I am related to this Bildung because I've been studying Bildung through my studies, and I teach at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology now, where we try to train future teachers to be aware of the potentials of Bildung and how that Bildung can be translated into a teaching practice in the classroom context.
Wow.
Cool.
So what emerges from this conversation? Questions you would like to ask Alka and Martin? Insights? Please, you are most welcome.
Yeah, it was fascinating to listen to both inputs from Martin and Alka. Thanks so much for bringing all of those issues to our attention here. I think that was very powerful, and especially coming from a Canadian context. At some point in my life, in my previous life, I did a master's degree at the University of Calgary in Calgary, Alberta. So I know Canada a bit, I would say. And also from what I know from the studies, Canada is at the forefront of this multiculturalism idea. So hearing about the complaints in the Canadian context makes me very pessimistic about the rest of the world. If you are facing these problems, you know, what the situation is in the rest of the world. But of course, you know, there's no perfect country. There is no perfect society. There is no perfect community. And I think that's what Bildung does to us as community members, but also as professionals, that it opens up the world for everybody and pushes us to think beyond ourselves, in a way, getting out of our head and looking around and trying to connect with people. And something that we try to teach the students here in Norway, in the university that I am at now, is that this idea of diversity, it exists no matter what. Even without the migrants, there is diversity in the society. There is different domains and dimensions of diversity, but as we grow up in the same communities, we just take everything for granted. And then I think the problem becomes when, how do we view the other? This migrant as the foreigner and the stranger and the other, that we have not had any experiences before. Then how do we connect with that? And I think that's where the potential of Bildung comes in. But I think also there is lots of work to be this kind of Bildung. It has to work both ways. So it's one way to think about it from the receiving society. What does the society do? And I see, for example, if I take the Norwegian example, the state does a lot to make the life of the migrants here more comfortable. But that doesn't excuse the migrants themselves to also work on themselves at the same time. It's really great that Canada, for example, wants the migrant communities to preserve their language, but it also would be really great if they work on their language skills and try to integrate themselves within the receiving society. And I think one issue when we deal with these migrant groups is that we only talk about the problems that they are facing in the receiving society. But another way to think about it would be, okay, to think about the challenges that they have now and compare that with the problems that they are running from. And I think it has to be mutual. Of course, different policy contexts, they have different policies in place, how to deal with the migrants. And and there is all of these different groups of migrants. Do you move as a professional or do you move as a refugee? It's a completely different story. And also one thing that we can observe is that at this time and age that we live in, there is a certain group of countries that are kind of the desirable migration destinations. So that tells us also a bit about the state of the world affairs, even though, for example, with all of the challenges that the migrant can expect to have in Canada, I would assume that the migrants would choose Canada before any other country. I'm not going to name any other country, but why is Canada such a desirable destination, or US or Australia or Europe or any of these more developed countries? So it just, I think it should make us think about the broader picture in a way.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
sorry, that was
great.
too long maybe, but yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for your contributions and insights. And Lene raised their hand. Would you like to talk, Lene?
I most certainly would. So
yes,
yes, no, I think we have a tendency to think of, migration, a lot of things as either the migrant into the receiving society or the receiving society opening up. And then you see the conflict or like one side of the challenge. And you mentally focus on that. And what we're really poor at is seeing the interdynamic, exchange from these two perspectives simultaneously. And your name is Tahirsay, right? Yeah. Armand is your first name. I'm a visual person. I read things and can remember them. If you just said your name, I would have forgotten it. But so that's my, shortcoming. So what we have to understand, or the real big change, is going from the not so many migrants situation to the lots of migrants situation, which are basically two different situations. And we, all of us, migrants and receiving society, have to make that change of perception and mind and culture, and saying, okay, so there is the situation is changing, the interaction is changing, the what it means to be a human being in a globalized world with 280 million people in between places is a different world from when there was not that many people traveling. And one of the things that is also really different in the migration today is that, I mean, 50 years ago, if you migrated from one place to the other, you could open your television or newspaper, whatever, and everything that came out of it was the culture from the place that you had landed, where you had landed. Whereas today, when you're a migrant, you can go on the internet, you can, I mean, 30 years ago, it was satellite television. You can still mentally choose to be in the place that you left. And I mean, some people do, some people don't. But that is also a fundamentally different situation. Okay, now I'm here, I really have to make it 100% where I am, was the terms and conditions 50 years ago, but that's different today. And I mean, there are refugees in Denmark who, after a while, go back to the country they left on vacation, even though they have, permanent residency and perhaps even citizenship in Denmark. And I mean, of course, that's where they came from. So we develop a different and more complex inner world because we end up holding two cultures in our head and our heart. And that is also a different situation because you can actually live both cultures. And so we need to understand that in a different way.
I think that's a good point, and I think it has to do with the identity that we adopt. Yeah. And I think that if you look at just the title that you have now, Global Bildung, it's the term global is something that now we have developed as societies in the way that we can think more abstractly about who we are and how do we go about life. So, and I think that's also Bildung could help us in that, in the sense that, we are not only this person who was born in a certain place, but we also can adopt more kind of like the city that we live in or the nation that we belong to. But also we have to transcend that a bit and think more globally and also consider ourselves a global citizen, especially now when we, migration is one of the challenges, but we have all of these other crises that are going, and there are a threat for the earth and the whole humanity, all of us. So I think in that, I think education, both formal and informal, has a role to play. And all of these initiatives that take place in the society through different NGOs and different organizations. So I think that's very helpful to get us into the thinking beyond our own self.
Thank you, Armand. And building on this, Martin, you raised your hand, global citizenship. Would you like to comment?
Well, a couple of things. I'm going to change my hat that I'm wearing for a second. I used to be one of those people responsible for immigration policy in Canada. And so I just want to answer some of the questions by asking a question of why do you think countries want to absorb these different kinds of migrants over a period of time, and which migrants are more valuable than others, and which migrants' voices are even more important than others. Because I think just hearing, Armand, what you were saying, I could read it as a sentence related to blaming the victims for not standing up to their rights and their responsibilities when they don't basically believe they have the agency or the authority to speak up and to be heard. And when we talk about it from a country's perspective and a policy perspective, where Bildung becomes really important, it really is to help those people who are determining policy to realize that when they think about migrants coming for different reasons, it's about whether, from a policy point of view, Canada is interested in absorbing the wisdom and the knowledge from the folks that are coming to the country. And do they value the wisdom, the knowledge that could better community? Governments don't consider that. That's not where they're coming from. They have different policies, but they have different purposes for absorbing different types of people for different purposes. So I think when you start thinking about a country that is looking at absorbing people in different ways, they have different reasons why they want to do this and why they want to put resources for certain types of people for certain periods of time, and they don't. So when you look at the idea of looking at countries that are receiving countries, you have to ask the country, why are you wanting to receive these people? And then what do you expect of them? And do you actually know what the people that you're inviting can actually contribute to this country, short-term and long-term, that they value in contributing, not what you value in contributing? Because that to me is a very different set of context. So in a sense, thinking about it from the receiving country and that intersection of what's important for both parties, that I still think is not understood and is still problematic. And Canada is a racist country, just to be really clear. And Canada does have a clear, even with multicultural policy, the good and bad, and we are perceived in the world in a certain way. But I think internally, Canada is turning its back on lots of people these days. It's not as becoming as it once was. So there's a different kind of context of what you perceive as a good receiving country is not necessarily true anymore. So the question I have to all of us is, let's ask the question of why do countries want to absorb people that they find moving around the world, and which of those people are important to them and which ones are not.
Thank you, Martin. And Alka and Lene. First, Alka raised the hand, and afterwards, Lene, please.
Yeah, I think that's really a key question, Martin, that you're raising. And I've always, I was about to say I've struggled with that, but I don't struggle with that anymore, because in my mind, it is quite clear that why countries, I'm talking in the context of Canada, particularly. For Canada, I believe that immigration policy is a way for Canada to grow its population. And it is to deal with the demographic challenges of an aging population and the need and the gaps in the labor market. So the policy is not coming from the perspective of the immigrant at all. So that's the biggest problem. So that's one piece of it. So on the one hand, Canada is we spend a lot of money integrating and settling newcomers. And don't get me wrong, there's people who don't have very high aspirations, who are not highly skilled, or even those who are highly skilled, but are quite happy to come to Canada to have a good quality of life. Because you can have a good quality of life without getting the best job or the job that you're trained for. And you say, okay, I know what I'm here for. I'm here to give my children a break. I'm here to get the next generation really settled well. I'm here to make good money that I didn't make back at home, or fresh, clean air. People are coming from all kinds of places for all kinds of reasons. So, and it's about choice. So anybody who comes with those perspectives and they are happy to, they were highly skilled, highly well-trained, they were engineers, they were doctors, but coming to Canada, if they make the choice to be anything else that's easier to get to and they can't get to their own profession, there's no problem with that. That's fine. That I see as a win-win. They got what they wanted, Canada got what the country wanted. The problem comes up when people who don't know what's going to happen, their expectations are very misaligned with the reality they're going to find, and they never get the opportunity for professional recognition and self-actualization. That's the perfect recipe for disaster, for mental health, for breakdown of everything, for not integrating at all, ever. So I feel that if a state is responsible, then they need to be upfront, and they need to also take care, they need to have a synchronization between the point system through which somebody comes into the country and then what happens to them later. So I don't know if I'm putting too much responsibility, too much expectation on the state, but I would like to put that expectation by asking this very question that Martin is asking. Why are states? Because on the one hand, it's very easy to say, well, immigration policy doesn't have to cater to people, really. It's some people might say that the policy makers might say that we are here to solve our problem. But then it is also easy if you get the different stakeholders together, and I'm talking in a labor market context only. If you can get all the stakeholders that can come together, whether from employers to accreditation agencies to licensing bodies to universities. But right now what's happening, a lot of money is being made off the backs of newcomers, immigrants. Education system is making a lot of money. And people fail one exam and we don't even know, there's no transparency. Nobody knows why somebody's failing. It's very easily can be said, oh, you just needed to register again and pay another $500. So this lack of transparency, the risk averseness of employers, the people shutting the door for no reason, these are very problematic scenarios. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
The reason why, countries want to embrace immigrants, I think most countries don't, unless there's as you write, labor market reason for doing so. If we can make money off the people coming in, or we don't have to pay for their education as doctors, for instance, let some other country pay for that. Then it's attractive to let immigrants in. But the poor immigrants, the uneducated immigrants, the immigrants from a different culture, different culture code, perhaps even, are challenging the existing systems and people's expectations and habits. And there is the richest countries are not too happy about too many poor immigrants. And as Armin said, the immigration tends to go one way. It's not people from Canada and Denmark migrating to Africa. And why is that? There's a colonial history, but there is also a current day situation where some states are failed. I'm not blaming them for doing that because we kind of messed it up for them. But for the people who were born within the past 150 years, that has been the present situation. So there's politics has turned into mostly economics. And as long as politics is economics, there is no ability to look at migration as a resource. And what I think is the resource among migrants is the double consciousness and the way that people do develop two identities or three identities, that they become bilingual, trilingual, multilingual, and can actually be translators between cultures, and where we can learn from each other around the globe, and where we can also, I would love to see a globe that was thriving, democratic, free, open, sustainable, with human rights all around the globe. But that takes a lot of Bildung. It takes a lot of investment in institutions, in rule of law, and in Bildung and in education. And so I think we could all benefit from the many migrants by actually using this as a resource in lifting the entire globe with regards to education and Bildung and human resources and economic development and rule of law and all the good stuff. So I would really want to see all these people who are willing to, go searching for a new life, and say, okay, how do we all benefit from that? Because there are lives that have higher quality of life than others, and I really wish the best for everybody.
Thank you, Lene. And just to sparkle a little bit more, when you bring this opportunity of the integration, the fruitful encounter, let's call it like that, from different cultures and contexts people come from, maybe it could be an interesting idea what each one of us has experienced in different countries as fruitful encounters between different people. What do you see in Denmark, for instance, that can be a fruitful encounter or a recognition of wisdom from other people? And the same for Armand and Alia. I would really, really like to include you, listen your voice about this, to bring us a little bit of her worlds. I would start by Alia. What do you see that can be a wisdom recognized, or that you would like that people would recognize?
Like in my country, I mean,
Yes. Let's
what
start
can
by that. Good idea.
what can be valuable for people that
Yes.
yeah. Um, I think that immigrants can learn a lot in Ukraine, how to be free, and this inside power. I think I feel it. I don't know. It's like feelings that you inside feelings, inside power, that you can change the world, and you can change it right now, and it's your responsibility. And this point that is your responsibility opens for you a lot of opportunity to make huge impact, like global impact. I think it's necessary for my country to be more open and to be receive more people, and be more open, I think. But what we can bring there, I don't know. I think this inner power and feeling of freedom, and we can change the world.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Alia. Armand, Martin raised their hand too. I don't know which one of you would like to go forward.
I just wanted to identify one
Yes.
thing that I think is really important is we each have an expectation of what our country offers us and what we are willing to give back to the country, what we expect from our families, from our communities, from the institutions. That's all broken down in many different ways, where that concept of what we owe each other has changed dramatically. So when we think about it, where newcomers come from, and I'm calling them newcomers, they come for different reasons, and they come, and there's a really interesting dynamic here that's really important. Do you know that many of I'm going to talk about the Canadian experience, 50% of people who come to Canada are controlled by the private sector. They come because they're there specifically labor market directed, and all the things that we consider to be important to give back to community is not a consideration whatsoever. It's not a part of it. We talk about folks who come from refugee experiences. That's a different kind of context. Then you have family class. And I mean, it breaks out in many different ways. I think you have to understand within that context, what is it that we as a society owe people who come to Canada? And in essence, then the expectation is, what do they then owe back to their families, back to their communities? And that process has broken down tremendously within the Canadian context. So when you say you're on your own, a lot of people are on their own without absolutely no capacity, no resources to be on their own. And so we have a segment of our society which believes that they're at fault and they're responsible, and they actually need to be held accountable, without any belief that if you provide them with resources, they become assets of community. in the context of migration, many parts of our community do not look at the other as being valuable because they have no responsibility to be part of their network, and we don't owe each other anything. And that's where we've moved in terms of being very much a collectivist society. Canadians used to be we used to be considered to be a collectivist society. We did things with each other, for each other. That's shifted quite a bit in the last 50 years. It's been very much individualistic. So if you think about Bildung, these are the contexts that what Bildung needs to address to bring back the way for people to start to look at what they actually could owe each other and what can be brought forward in terms of all the shared assets within community, I believe.
Thank you, Martin. And Alka raised the hand also. We are talking about collective, how do you say it in English? Like bringing again this tissue of collectiveness, bringing
Fabric.
together, fabric, thank you, appreciation for each other and for being together, building something together. Thank you, Martin. Alka, please.
Yeah, and for that to be actualized, I think the first thing that needs to be addressed is the balance of power, the dynamics of power, which is so uneven, and the understanding that, okay, these people, that they are coming from you have to improve your language, you have to build soft skills, you don't have any network, you don't have any social capital. It's a very deficit-based model that is being used to even have whatever your perception may be of someone who is an outsider because they are the other. And if only the lens to see someone, it takes courage to pack up everything and leave and go build a new life somewhere else, leave home. Like, that's the real getting out of your comfort zone and throwing yourself off a cliff many times when people do that voluntarily. I'm not talking about people who have no choice but to leave because of some disaster or persecution, or refugees who've been in refugee camps. And so that is, you're looking for safe haven. You're just looking to lead, to kind of live, be alive. That's different. But there are so many, and even for them, I mean, anybody can become a refugee any day, like literally. So in that sense, and many of the people who come to Canada as part of the refugee class are actually highly qualified, did have very good jobs or good businesses and everything back at home. So the point is that if we continue to look at someone who is different from yourself in a way to see them as inferior or lower, then that's the first starting of the problem. So how does one address that? So the power dynamics, as I was talking about, leveling the playing field, how do we get to equity? You needn't get to equality, but you need to at least level that playing field so that people can have access to opportunity. I mean, it's very unfair questions.
Can I ask a question? So what kind of cultural institutions open doors, not just to the job market, the labor market, and not just to, daycare institutions and stuff like that? What kind of, what is the cultural environment that migrants, where the doors are open when people arrive in Canada? So and how many speak English when they get there? Because when people get to Denmark, nobody speaks Danish. So that's a different kind of barrier.
So I think Martin wants to say something.
Well, just very quickly, there are many systems in place from community, supported by government, where they actually act as a place of receiving. And families have a very important role within that context. Employers have a role within that context. The problem is not about what happens, and in terms of the quality of those kinds of resources, it still is an issue. It's much more about the fact that those voices from the various people who actually are coming are very, very minimal and are not perceived as valuable. So even if somebody from a community starts speaking about the quality of the service they receive, those comments are not deemed as being valuable by the larger system. Probably the last thing that's important that I've been involved in is about actually how do the folks that come from different countries have the voice that are going to be recognized, are going to be heard, and are going to be valued. And that's a challenge because we know, broadly speaking, that generally their voices are not heard, not understood, and not recognized, and not valued. That's one. Second thing, and that's not to blame them. It's not about blaming the victim. The reality is the systems that wanted and encouraged people to come to Canada do not necessarily really value that process and value the voices of the people who they've actually received in a way that actually is perceived by the cultural communities, New Canadians, as important to them. One. Second thing is communities and individuals are always focusing about their well-being and their health within their community, within their larger concept. What has happened and what we found out is that systems will define that for those communities. And so where is this co-creation? Where is the opportunity for communities' voices to be heard about how they want to define what's important for them? So those are very subtle, but they do exist in every country in the world. And so the real question simply is, when you think about a receiving country and receiving migrants from many different places in the world, they have to look inward in terms of changing their responsibility and the social contract with what they owe people so that people can stand on their own. But I worry about some of the context where people who are trying to be very helpful blame the victim.
Yes.
And they basically think it's your choice. You should stand up and take responsibility for yourself. But the underlying conditions make that totally impossible.
Thank you, Martin. And by the point of all voices matter that is such a theme so caring for us, I would really like to invite Brian to speak. Brian, what could you share with us about your context, your place in the world, Uganda? We are really curious.
And I happen to come from an African country that is very much receptive towards the refugees. I think it is ranked amongst the top 5 in the world, because even the latest problem that has been in Afghanistan, where the Taliban rule has taken over, Uganda has been, is one of the countries that was receptive towards the Afghans who wanted to flee from the country and go to some other places where they would really find peace and understand out of the 2,000 refugees that were supposed to come to Uganda, only 51 have so far arrived in Uganda. And I really wanted to note that and bring that to your attention, that a country where I hail from, it is hugely receptive towards the refugees. Yeah, and I think if at all you can even research about that, you will really attest to what I'm trying to raise here. Then about what Lynn Rachel Anderson, I don't know whether I've pronounced her names correctly. Yeah. Truly many youthful Ugandans don't feel like remaining here to work in Uganda because of, the economic hardships, the political strife that really ravages most of the African nations. However, as Lini has really underscored, it is true, Africa has a lot of resources, and you wonder why someone of the young age would really prefer to go to the West other than staying here and, you know, um, harnessing the resources that we have around. Majorly it is because of the low technological advancement in Africa, you know, the lack of the political will. And when you look at um, Africa and the West, in as far as remuneration is concerned, by that is one of the biggest reason, the congruent reason as to why most youth go to the West, prefer to go to the West than remain here in Africa. It is about the remuneration, because you find that in the West, there is paying per hour, paying per week, which is not here. You know, because here you have to wait for a full month. So you work until when the month elapses, that is when you'll have to be paid. So one will prefer to go to a place where at least he knows every after a week I'm going to be paid and more handsomely than where I am. So I think for, for, for now, that is what I have to communicate.
We are in the last minutes of our session by now. In these last minutes, what would you like to highlight? If each one of us could highlight what comes when we talk about Bildung and the fruitful encounter between two cultures, two people, different approaches, myself and the other, as Alka said. Would you like to start, Alka? What comes to you as a meaningful hope based on Bildung?
What I want to say very quickly is that actually Canada does have a very big integration settlement sector, and also a really good, refugee resettlement program. So building on some of the good work that different countries already have, it's important to see where the gaps are and how those can be. For example, I think lived experience is really important. So, and recognizing that, what people bring and how they can be best made more empowered. So I guess it has to be a local solution to a global problem. And as far as Bildung goes, what Bildung has to offer in terms of, the kind of thinking, the framework, the conceptualization that can support what different people in different parts of the world are really doing in a very engaged manner. It's more like coming together, bringing resources together, and through a kind of a way of, like, from a worldview, from a values perspective. Yeah, that's all I can add to that.
My last statement that I want to make is more individual. It's more about the individual who lives in a country, who is part of a receiving community. And my assumption is for them to actually dig deep inside themselves, to actually take the time to understand the value of another person and really understand the other. Even though we have all these wonderful systems, we work, and Alka and I work in the same areas, we work with a lot of people who are part of the receiving community, who say they want to receive others from other countries, but that's not necessarily accurate, nor is it true, because they still do not come to the place of valuing somebody who's different than them. And whatever that difference may be. And what we have not talked about is that there's a larger percentage of people ever before in this country who don't agree with multiculturalism. So I mean, we have We have people within many of our communities who just don't understand the other and are not even thinking about how to understand the other person. Bildung, in terms of not actually giving people an education, but helping them to co-create their own world of their knowledge and their experience and what they value in terms of their wisdom. That's the conversation we're having here about helping people see the value of another human being that may be different than them.
Thank you. So thank you all for this special session. Let's go back to the main room, green button. And in this case, land is going to be flat only by now in Padlet. That's an affirmation, not an assumption. And see you back in the main session. I'll see you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye bye.
Brian,
Thank
see you there. Bye.
Brian,
Thank you.
hope
Thank
you
you.
can join us. Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Alka. Thank you all. Bye bye.